Greetings, YouTube. 1863, New York, New York, 120 African Americans murdered. 1866, New Orleans, Louisiana, 50 African Americans, assume the following figures are black, murdered. 1866, Memphis, Tennessee, 46 murdered. 1868, Appaloosas, Louisiana, 250 murdered. 1868, St. Bernard Parish, Louisiana, 135 murdered. 1868, Camilla, Georgia, 15 murdered. 1873, Colfax, Louisiana, 153 murdered. 1874, Vicksburg, Mississippi, 300 murdered. 1874, Efula, Alabama, I apologize if I'm saying that wrong, 40 murdered. 1875, Clinton, Mississippi, 50 murdered. 1887, Thibodaux, Louisiana, 35 plus murdered. 1898, Wilmington, North Carolina, 300 murdered. 1906, Atlanta, Georgia, 25 murdered. 1908, Springfield, Illinois, 14 murdered. 1910, Slocum, Texas, 100 murdered. 1917, St. Louis, Missouri, 250 murdered. 1919, Chicago, Illinois, 38 murdered. 1919, Elaine, Arkansas, 237 murdered. 1919, Washington, D.C., 40 murdered. 1920, O.C., Florida, 4 murdered. 1921, Tulsa, Oklahoma, 200 plus murdered. 1923, Rosewood, Florida, 150 murdered. 1943, Detroit, Michigan, 34 murdered. 1985, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, 11 murdered. 2015, Charleston, South Carolina, 9 murdered. Those are facts. They exist in reality. The GOP doesn't like facts, particularly facts like those. Facts like those could be construed as to cast a negative opinion of white people, because it was white people that killed all the people I just mentioned. White nationalists, white supremacists, good, law-abiding Christians that went out of their way to murder black people because they could, and they'd get away with it. So when somebody says critical race theory, those are the kinds of things that the GOP doesn't want taught to our students. Did you hear about any of those massacres when you were in school? I did. Did you hear about redlining? I did. Did you hear about the massacre that committed by Mormons against Native Americans? I didn't learn about that till a decade after I graduated. These are all facts, and the GOP hates them. The GOP hates anything that could potentially make white people feel uncomfortable, because keeping white people comfortable is far more important to the GOP than the lives of every single black person on this continent. Because so long as they can keep white people comfortable, the white people will continue to vote for them and turn a blind eye, willfully ignore those types of facts that I just read to you. Someone says critical race theory and they're from the right, that's a dog whistle. Because critical race theory is just saying we should be critical of the racial history and the racial politics in America today. We should cast a strong eye upon how the racial dynamic of America works and has worked, how discrimination and oppression has worked and is working, how the exploitation of black people in the past and the exploitation of minorities in the present has worked, and does work. And the GOP really doesn't want you to know about that. They really don't want your children to be taught that. Because those white children maybe feel guilty for the fact that people just like them benefited from that. Because while they don't want you to think about that, they sure as shootin' don't mind the fact that a whole lot of white people today benefited from that, established generational wealth because of those eras in the past and the present. That exploitation, that discrimination, that oppression. They're real happy about keeping all that wealth. They just don't want to think about where it came from, because that would make white people uncomfortable. And to the GOP, a single white person being uncomfortable is vastly more serious than the murder of any black person in this country.